Okay, another retro review for the original series. This is Tomorrow is Yesterday, after a moment. Hello out there, I'm the oldest nerd, and today, Tomorrow is Yesterday, written by D.C. Fontana, who wrote some of the best stories in Star Trek. In addition to that, she was also a script editor, which means that she probably rewrote a number of scripts that were under other people's names. Interestingly, this was what Gene Roddenberry was known for before he began Star Trek, as being one of the best rewrite people in Hollywood, and that's how he was able to get first The Lieutenant, which was his first series, and then Star Trek. At any rate, the episode now, Tomorrow is Yesterday, is a time travel episode. This is the first one that they would go back to time and time again in movies and in subsequent series, all the way up to, well, the last Picard series was all about time travel. So it's an easy way to do it, and being science fiction, you can just say, we've thrown magic dust out, or we've slingshotted around the sun, or we had a special crystal, or we had a superhuman being put us there. However it gets there, it shows that there are some problems, and Star Trek probably has covered most of them. In fact, in a Deep Space Nine episode, they kind of played for mild chuckles the different ways of going back into time, whether it was something that was meant to happen already, whether it's something that would have changed history, but you fixed it before you got back, or things that had no effect. This is, in the case of this, they were trying to, after messing up history, they had to go back and fix it. And the way they did it was not completely believable, honestly, but the story itself was compelling enough. Bring a 20th century Air Force pilot onto the Enterprise and see how he reacts. And there's some interesting acting in this. First time seeing an alien, first time leaving Earth orbit for anybody that was human. And so along that line, it was pretty good. Otherwise, it was an easy way to make an inexpensive show, since all you had to have was some stock footage of aircraft taking off. There was a lot of that in public service announcements of planes taking off and things like this. And plain old sets, just a hallway and glass doors and a sign on it that says whatever squadron it was. So a military base was not a hard thing to construct a set for. You didn't have to do any kind of strange shapes. You didn't have to have anything that wasn't already in the prop department. And so you have people in Air Force uniforms, you have a part of a computer. Even in the day, a computer would not have been that small, but they had just a tape drive in one of the rooms, which was kind of interesting because there wasn't anything attached to it. Nevertheless, they used that as their excuse to be able to take a computer tape that was basically a recording of the flight, and then they go into the photo lab, which no doubt is just the editing room at Desilu that they used for the purposes of being the dark room for the Air Force Base. And then, of course, they had the usual technobabble as to how they were going to be able to pull out. Even Captain Christopher, our 20th century Air Force pilot, kind of pointed that out, that he didn't care about hearing any of the fancy language that they were throwing back and forth. Just tell us what's going on. We've done that in many cases in many shows hereafter. This was the first time that I heard them actually explain what the ship's authority was under the United Earth Space Probe Agency. Otherwise, you've heard of it mentioned as USPA. In this one, this is still, they don't have the United Federation of Planets established just yet. Even though Gene Kuhn was already listed in the credits, a lot of his innovations, like developing the idea of the Federation, of Starfleet Command rather than Starfleet Control, as they mention here, and other things were not quite developed yet. They do use the term time warp for the first time, and they've used it since then as a way of slingshotting around the sun. They did that again in Star Trek 4. So terms like this actually got into the popular lexicon, as many Star Trek terms did, and Time Warp was actually the first song in the Rocky Horror Picture Show. So there. In the very beginning of the episode where they are basically in a low Earth orbit trying to turn everything back on, everything is dead except for auxiliary power, and Spock says if Mr. Scott is still with us, the power will come back in a moment. And the power comes back and he says Mr. Scott is still with us. Interestingly, the same line was repeated by Kirk at the very end of the episode after they have pulled themselves back to their own century, and Scotty calls the bridge, and Kirk says, Mr. Scott is still with us. So it's a vote of confidence that as long as Scotty is with them, they're going to be all right. Interestingly, in this episode, Kirk breaks the fourth wall when he is interrogated by the Air Force security fellow who becomes rather impatient with him and says, I'm going to lock you up for 200 years. Kirk looks directly into the camera and says, that ought to be just about right. I rather like that line. It's one of my favorite in Star Trek. They mention a black star. The term black hole had not been coined at that time, and interestingly, it did follow the science on what we knew of black holes later on. Now, more recent things are bringing into doubt exactly what a black hole is, but certainly it wasn't a bad projection. So, a good episode. It was enjoyable, although we find that really their biggest nemesis was themselves, trying to undo mistakes that they'd already made. As Captain Christopher pointed out, you make quite a few of them. So, and it was completely useless to have the computer personality. Spock seemed to be annoyed by it, and Kirk was having nothing to do with it. And they said it was a planet of women. It's one of the other places in the original series where whenever they mention a woman, they mean someone inferior. And that's kind of bad, even when it's written by D.C. Fontana. So I'd like to know what you think about this episode, and we will continue once a week with more of these retro reviews for Star Trek. This comes to you, I'll try to get that to you on Fridays. On Tuesdays, we'll get you our Doctor Who retro review, and then we will have other videos as we have new shows coming on, and hope that you will join us for all of that. Make sure that you know when we're going to have another video come out by becoming a subscriber. It doesn't cost you anything. It's no obligation, but once you become a subscriber and ring the bell, you'll be informed when our next video comes your way, and we'd love to have you along. So until next time, subscribe if you haven't done so, and leave some comments in the bottom, and we will communicate. Until then, though, don't go far.